Gigi's Playhouse. So I worked for the national office at Gigi's Playhouse, which is in Hoffman Estates, for 4 years, doing marketing and development, and then working with the startup teams to create more Gigi's Playhouses, which is where I met the Deerfield team and transitioned to their full-time staff member last October, so I've been with them for about a year. So a long time with Gigi's Playhouse, and I'm very proud of what I do, and happy to share it with you guys. So what in general is Gigi's Playhouse? We are a Down syndrome achievement center, so we provide free therapeutic and educational programs to individuals with Down syndrome and their families. The other great thing about Gigi's Playhouse is that all of our programs are developed for the specific needs of people with Down syndrome, but we are inclusive to everybody. If somebody feels like their child could benefit from the programs that they offer, they're also welcome to attend. But the way that we develop our programs, we write grants, are for individuals with Down syndrome. Gigi's Playhouse started in 2003 with the birth of Gigi. So Nancy Gianni is the founder of the Playhouse. When she gave birth, she had 2 kids prior to having Gigi, and the experience when Gigi was born was very different than the first 2 children. So most parents will hear congratulations when you have a child. A lot of the families that have a child with Down syndrome, the first thing that they hear is, I'm sorry. You still just had a baby, you still are a brand new mother, you're still excited about your child, and you should always hear congratulations before you hear anything else, but that's not the experience for a lot of our first-time moms. So Nancy wanted to change that dialogue and wanted to make it a better experience for other families who followed her. Unfortunately, we still have some issues today, we're still working towards that, but we've come a long way from when Nancy gave birth to Gigi. So just a year after Gigi was born, she opened the first Playhouse. She came from a marketing background as well, had no idea what a nonprofit would entail. She jokingly, but also truthfully, stole internet from the company next door. That's all she had. She was printing business cards on a Word document through her own printer at home. She finished painting the Playhouse about 20 minutes before they opened their doors to the first families, which is pretty amazing. From there, we've come a very long way. Initially, it was just a place for resources and networking. She just wanted a place where families would feel comfortable and safe talking to each other and sharing experiences, sharing challenges, in an environment where people understood what they were going through, but quickly realized that there was a greater need for the families out there. So just a few years after she started the Playhouse, we developed our programs. She got together a team of incredible experts, all different therapists in their field, to create programs specifically for the needs of individuals with Down syndrome that can be run by volunteers. If you ask any Fortune 500 company, our model is a nightmare. It's probably true. And that's for 2 reasons. One is that most Playhouses outside the national office are run with 1 paid staff member, and the rest is done by volunteers. We have 100 volunteer hours for every 1 paid staff member hour, which is absolutely incredible. All of our programs are run by volunteers. We train them all, we background check them all to do the programs in the way that we see fit, in the way that's beneficial for our participants. And our volunteers can come from any background. They don't have to be somebody who's experienced with special needs. They don't have to be a therapist. They just have to come with an open mind and a willingness to be trained to do what we need to do. The second reason that Fortune 500 companies hate us is that everything that we work on and everything we do, we give away for free. We do not charge for any of our services. We don't charge for any of our programs. Everything that we can offer our families, we will always offer for free. And that includes anything that we do outside of the Playhouse. So if we do community events, we'll either eat the cost ourselves or figure out a way that we can fundraise for it, find a sponsor or a donor. We will never force our families to pay for anything. The other incredible thing about Gigi's Playhouse is how fast it's grown. So we just opened in 2003. We opened in Deerfield this January. We're the 42nd Playhouse. There are now 46 locations across the United States. We have a Playhouse in Mexico, which is pretty awesome. It's our mission Playhouse. The families that go there will get on a bus for 4 hours to get to the Playhouse. There are no other services. They don't have early intervention. They aren't guaranteed a school placement. And definitely not an inclusive school placement like we have in some communities up here. So it's a pretty incredible place. They also have 400 volunteer hours to every 1 paid staff member hour. Down in Mexico Playhouse, which is pretty incredible. There are inquiries all over the world to open additional Gigi's Playhouses, which is amazing. So we're quickly expanding, growing our model, growing our programs, and just incredibly proud of what we're doing and how we're changing the world. So here in Illinois, which is what matters to you guys, these are the Playhouses that we currently have open. Bradley, Central Illinois, is something that we call a pop-up location. So one of the things that makes Gigi's unique is that we do have a brick and mortar building for the most part. And that gives families a place to come, and it creates a routine. Our families typically will have speech therapy, occupational therapy, and physical therapy just as a basics every single week. On top of that, some of them may have feeding therapy, behavioral, developmental, and so all those different patterns and routines can be overwhelming. So we always want to have a place and kind of routine events and programs running on our Playhouse so it becomes part of their schedule. You go to soccer practice on Tuesday night, you go to Gigi's Playhouse on Wednesday. It's hard for them to chase activities down. So the more that routine we can make it, the easier it is for them. But it's not always affordable to have a brick and mortar location. We have to cover the rent and all the utilities for that space. And so we did create a pop-up method, especially for rural areas, to also be able to offer a playhouse. So all their materials are held at a local playhouse, the closest one to them, and then sent to them when they need to run programs. So they can run them in rural areas. So that's what our central Illinois location is. Deerfield, we just opened this January. Fox Valley Hoffman Estates is our national office, a big location. They have about 30 staff members that help to support all 46 locations. McHenry, Quad Cities, Rockford, and Kennebec. So this is our general mission: to change the way the world views Down syndrome through national campaigns, educational programs, and by empowering individuals with Down syndrome, their families, and the community. And our vision is to create a world where individuals with Down syndrome are accepted and embraced in communities, families, and schools. The important thing about Gigi's Playhouse is the community aspect of it. While we are a place for individuals with Down syndrome and other special needs, it's incredibly important to bring the community in. We can't survive without volunteers, without the support of sponsors and corporate partnerships and things like that. So it really is about getting to know our kiddos and falling in love with everything that we love about them. So we heard Nancy's story, who opened the first Playhouse, but I also think it's really important to hear the story of the family that opened my Playhouse, Deerfield Playhouse. It is a tearjerker, so I apologize. So just warning. So what is Down syndrome? We just went through this whole history and all these incredible family stories. But what actually causes Down syndrome? What is Down syndrome? So Down syndrome happens when there's 3 copies of the 21st chromosome. You can see the cool little socks here. This is actually just a blown up image of what our genes look like. And under 21, we've got the 3 copies. That's all that it is. That's all Down syndrome is. It's 1 extra chromosome. So we always see our kiddos have a little extra, which is pretty special. It's a random occurrence. There's nothing that parents do that cause Down syndrome in their pregnancy. There's nothing that they can prep for or genetically test to see if they're going to have a child with Down syndrome. Only 1% of Down syndrome is hereditary. Otherwise, we just say you're one of the lucky few who has a child. The most common form of Down syndrome is trisomy 21, and that's what we're looking at in this image here, where all 3 chromosomes are connected. But there is actually 2 other versions of Down syndrome. One is called translocation, and that's when that 3rd copy of the chromosome can attach to any other set of chromosomes. And then there's also a form called mosaic Down syndrome, which tends to be the least impacted by the genes. And that's when there's only a portion of the genes, or the DNA, that actually breaks off. So it's, the 3rd copy is just a portion of it, and that can connect to any other set of genes as well. But the most common form that you'll see is trisomy 21. Down syndrome is the most common chromosomal abnormality in the entire country. It's also the least funded by the government. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The primary one being that we have never sought out a cure. We're not trying to change our kids. We're not trying to change their chromosomes. We're just trying to make their lives the best that they can be. And what we tend to like to fund is a cure, is a solution to a problem that they see, which is never the case with a lot of Down syndrome associations. It doesn't discriminate against any racial or socioeconomic lines. It can happen to any family of any race. We have families of all different races that come to the Playhouse. We're very fortunate to be a very inclusive environment, which is pretty incredible. The other thing that I want to mention, which has nothing to do with Down syndrome, but I think is really unique about our Playhouse, is that not only are our programs for all ages, but our volunteers are all ages. We can start kiddos volunteering from 3, 4, 5 years old, all the way through adults, which is pretty awesome. And I think that's what creates that atmosphere of inclusive. It's 1 in every 690 births, so it's still pretty common. And over 400,000 people are living with Down syndrome in the United States. That number would be quite a bit higher, but the abortion rate is at 83 to 85% in the United States. It's incredibly high. It's even higher in a lot of countries in the European nation, which is pretty scary. Iceland, for most effective, they've got almost a 100% termination rate because of genetic testing. So that's part of our outreach and trying to get the word out there that this isn't scary, that it's not something that needs to be terminated, it's not something that needs to be feared. These kids and adults are absolutely amazing. And the other stigma that I think is associated with Down syndrome is parents or moms tend to be older, and it's actually not true. The average age of a parent of a child with Down syndrome is 28 years old, which is young for a parent, much less a parent to a child with special needs. Several of the moms that we've met, we've had 8 new babies come to the Playhouse in the last 6 months. These are either birth or prenatal diagnoses. And most of the moms are 20, 22, 23 years old. First time young moms. They're just trying to figure out how to be a parent, much less a parent to a child with special needs. So there are 4 universal challenges for people with Down syndrome. Hypotonia, or cognitive impairment, career limitations, and then acceptance is a big one. Hypotonia is the one that we talk about a lot because it's what our programs are mostly geared toward. So that's called low muscle tone. If anybody has ever had an x-ray and had to put that lead vest on, that's what Down syndrome and that low muscle tone feels like all the time. They don't get a relief from taking that vest off and having somebody else bear the weight for a few minutes. If you've ever had a child and you carried them to bed after they've fallen asleep, that dead weight, again, that's kind of what it feels like, just lax muscles all the time. And it's every single muscle in your body that has that elasticity. So it impacts speech is a big one. Feeding, swallowing, breathing can be difficult. Everything that you do that comes naturally to you, they don't even think about, their body has to put a lot of thought and effort into doing. And that's why our kiddos start therapy right from an early age. There is a kiddo that comes to the Playhouse, his name is Finn. He was in the NICU for about 2 months after he was born, started PT at 4 days old. He was still in the NICU. Parents had only actually gotten to see him 1 day before his therapy started. The other, we'll get to that in a second. Cognitive impairment is the second one. So one of the things that goes along with Down syndrome is this delay in expressive language is a big one. It's the biggest one that people see. So a lot of times they can understand what you're saying, they can process what you're saying, but getting the words out to be able to communicate that they understand it and they can answer your question can be a challenge for them. The other thing that I recommend when you're working or talking to somebody with Down syndrome or any kind of cognitive impairment is time. Most of the time people will answer questions for them, not because they don't know the answer, but because that pause can feel awkward to us. It doesn't feel awkward to them. There's a lot going on in their brains that they're processing what you're saying, they're trying to get their response, and then figure out how to get all the muscles to move in the right way to get their response out. So for them, they're just processing everything we're saying. For us, we're feeling that weird pause. But I recommend anytime you're talking to somebody who's got that kind of impairment, just give them a little bit of space. A lot of times they will get their response out and they'll say what they need to say, and sometimes they won't, and that's okay. We can re-ask the question or ask it in a different way so they can understand a little bit better. But just allowing them the time and space to process is a huge part. A lot of our kiddos, especially in this area, we're very fortunate, are in inclusively classrooms, which is really impressive for the school districts, but also for our kiddos. There have been a ton of studies that show the benefit, not only to an individual with Down syndrome or any kind of special need in being in an inclusive environment, but also to their peers, of having somebody who's a little bit different in their classroom and learning things a little bit differently. The third one is limited adult opportunities. Like I say to all my kids when they go and speak at schools, if you can imagine dreaming your whole life about what you want to be when you grow up and then not having options, how hard that would be. If you guys think about how much time you spend at work and then outside of work thinking about work or still working even though you're not at work, and not being able to do something that you at least semi-enjoy would be devastating. That's a huge part of our adult lives, is spending time at work. And a lot of our individuals don't have the option to choose where they're going to work. This is the only place that will take me, or this is the only place that will accommodate the things that I need. These two, Ryan and Christine, have been together for 4 years. Ryan hates when I don't point him out. He comes and works at the Playhouse with me. They both work in a movie theater, and they absolutely love their jobs. But it was a long process to get them those careers there. A lot of times you see our adults bagging at grocery stores, and for some of our adults, it's not a great opportunity for them because it's overwhelming. It's a lot of sensory processing. It's a really fast-paced environment. There's a lot of pressure when you're standing there, and it's a long time on your feet. And when we just talked about that hypotonia, that's a lot of weight to carry when you're standing on your feet the whole time. So our goal is to find companies and businesses that are not only willing to take on an adult who has a disability, but kind of encouraging it and excited about it so that we can help them make sure that they have the skills that they need to be successful in the environment, and the company has the accommodations that they need for them to be comfortable. So we try and bridge that gap and create those conversations and those connections in the community. And then the fourth one is acceptance. The first family, brand new family that we met at the Playhouse, had a 10-day-old son. He had just gotten the diagnosis officially that day. It was a birth diagnosis, but genetic testing takes a while. He was unfortunately born on a Friday, so they had to wait the whole weekend just to have the test done, and then wait a whole week to get the results back. So at 10 days old, they came into the Playhouse about 2 hours after they officially got their diagnosis. And they sat down with the family, and they were beaming. They were so thrilled. They said, "We don't care about Down syndrome. We love our son. We're scared of acceptance. We know that we're going to do everything that we can for our son. We know he's going to be amazing, but will everybody else be able to see that?" And that's incredibly scary for a lot of our families. And there's a lot that we can do to help support that. There's a lot that you guys are going to learn that you can do to support that as well, and are already doing, which is amazing. But that's part of our community aspect with the Playhouse, is having kids come in and volunteer and making those connections. When we talk to kids, a lot of times they don't mean to be bullies, or they don't mean to be exclusive or keeping kids who are a little bit different away. It's that they don't know how to connect to somebody who's a little bit different from them. And so we try and bridge those gaps. Slime is the greatest.
Social connection.
Combined activity that we've ever created. So thank goodness slime became trendy in the last 2 years, because these kids come into Playhouse and it's an activity that they love to do. I'm talking typically developing peers will come in here. They love making slime. They've made it 1,000 times at home, so they feel like there's something that they can kind of show off a little bit. And for us, it's a great therapy. It's a great fine motor skill. You're working your hand muscles. You're working on sequencing, which can be a huge challenge, right? So you have to follow the recipe correctly or your slime doesn't turn out right. And so they get to connect on something that they both enjoy. And that's been a huge asset to the Playhouse, is finding those weird connections like slime. The other thing that's interesting about Down syndrome, and is pretty much unique to Down syndrome, is that they wear the diagnosis on their face. So there's a lot of, we call them invisible illnesses or invisible disabilities that you can't tell right away, but you can immediately tell somebody has Down syndrome. And so that already puts up judgments and assumptions about them right when they're walking in the door, which can be both a challenge for career opportunities, but also for making friends, for making acquaintances, for anything that you do in life. And that's why that low social expectation is such a huge part of it, that we really need to change the dialogue and create this opportunity for them to excel and reach the expectations that you guys have for yourselves. It's nothing that they can't do, they just might need a little extra time to do it. We also talk a lot in the Playhouse about self-confidence. We want them to feel like they can be advocates for themselves. So we have a stage at the Playhouse where they can, just like the physical manifestation of being confident, right, is being able to go up on stage and publicly speak. And a lot of our adults are being trained to do that. We also have the world's greatest karaoke nights. So if you want to join us for that, it's a lot of fun. So along with Down syndrome comes a lot of other health concerns that can be more concerning than Down syndrome actually is. 50% of our kids are born with heart defects. And we're talking pretty major heart defects. So most of them will have open heart surgery by the time they're about 6 months old. That's half of them. So now you're talking about expenses with therapy that they have to start right away, but also expenses in the NICU, expenses for heart surgery. I just recently learned that going to Lurie Children's Hospital, which is where a lot of our kids go, $14 a day in parking is the cheapest that you will find. A lot of times it's more expensive than that, and they spend weeks at the hospital. You also can't make your own food because you're at the hospital every day. And all of these financial burdens add up and add up and add up, and that's in the first year of life. And that's why our free programming is so important to our families. Secondly, a lot of them have vision and hearing issues. A lot of them are with glasses. They have cataracts or are born with cataracts. Hearing can be a challenge. We do work with hearing aids and things like that as well, but those are also accommodations that you want to think of when you're creating programs for individuals with Down syndrome and other abilities. They do tend to have a weaker immune system, so we want to make sure we sanitize everything. We're as safe as possible around our kiddos. There's an incredibly high chance of childhood leukemia, which is really scary. It starts from about age 3 to age 11. Nobody knows why they have a higher chance. But on the other side of it, they also have a higher likelihood of surviving childhood leukemia. Because they have a slow metabolism and low muscle tone, chemo actually stays in their body for longer than it does a typical adult. And so their processing of the medication actually gives them a really high survival rate. But it's an incredibly scary thing for our kiddos to go through and for the families to go through. There's an incredibly high risk for Alzheimer's disease. We don't even have a statistic on it because of that cognitive impairment. It can be difficult to tell if they're just aging or if it's an Alzheimer's thing. They're estimated that 50% or higher of our adults will get Alzheimer's early on in life. They start at about 40, 50 years old receiving the Alzheimer's diagnosis. And then severe sleep apnea. If anybody has ever had several nights of bad sleep, it infects every part of your body. You physically feel exhausted, you mentally feel exhausted, and if you can't breathe, you can't sleep, and that impacts every part of their body. So the other part that I want to tell is Nicole's story. This is one of my favorite quotes, and it's fitting for her. Your wings already exist, all you have to do is fly. Nicole's one of the first adults that I met when I worked at the national office in Hoffman Estates. And her mom sat down and told me her story, which is still one of the stories that stays with me to this day, which is why I want to share with you guys. So Nicole was in kindergarten and first grade in a public school, and it was incredibly difficult for her. Kindergarten, there wasn't a lot of accommodations for her. People didn't know how to react to her. She was in an inclusive classroom, but kind of sat in a corner and wasn't asked to participate in anything. So they asked for changes when they went to first grade. She was still in the inclusive class. It wasn't working. She was incredibly bullied. Kids were throwing rocks at her. They weren't accepting her. It was a dangerous, not only not helpful environment for her, but it was dangerous. And so they transferred schools, went to another school, and the same thing was happening. She wasn't accepted, she was bullied, and finally her mom didn't know what to do, and she pulled her out of school. So in kindergarten and first grade, Nicole started to make progress in speech, and after she was taken out of school, she stopped communicating altogether. Never spoke a word to her mom, to anybody. So she was homeschooled for the next 15 years, and I met Nicole when she was 30 years old. She was still completely nonverbal, She came into the Playhouse for the first time. And we have a program called, at the Hoffman Estates location, we have a program called Gigi University, which is after they graduate out of high school, it's a program that they can go to 2 to 3 days a week, 7 hours a day. It's a long program. It's also the only program that we offer where you have to be interviewed to get into the program because it's grueling and because we have a high expectation of what the adults are going to do once they graduate out of that program. So her mom brought her in to interview for GGU, which you can imagine is a challenge for an adult who's nonverbal. So we sat with the mom and asked what her goals for Nicole were, what she thought Nicole's goals were, and then we looked down, and Nicole was drawing this incredible butterfly, which is so symbolic of who Nicole becomes later on in life. So she's drawing this beautiful butterfly, and we thought, let's just take a chance on Nicole. Let's put her in this program. At the very least, she could make friends who can connect to her and maybe open up this wall. Slowly but surely, she started doing 1 word, 2 words at a time, 3 words at a time. 4 years later, Nicole has a job. She's completely communicative. She has best friends. She's in a DJ club and goes and this incredible volunteer who's a professional DJ will bring our adults to gigs with him, and they're his assistant. They're paid. They have a full-time job. She goes to these incredible nightclubs and parties and is his assistant as a DJ, which is pretty awesome. She has a boyfriend who lives in Florida. They FaceTime, so they're able to communicate and effectively have a relationship long distance, which is pretty incredible. But most of all, she's got a place. She has a safe place where she can go. She has best friends that she can see. And her transformation as a butterfly is one of the most incredible things I've ever seen in my life. But the reason that this story is so important, and I tell this in elementary schools, is because the power of being nice to somebody would have changed Nicole's life 30 years ago, right? It took 25 years for her to feel comfortable opening up to people. And if somebody had just reached out in that 1st grade or in that 2nd grade and just made a friend, took a chance on somebody who's a little bit different, her life would be so drastically different, right? She wouldn't have spent 25 years in the shell. And that's what I don't want to happen to any other child. And that's why we go and speak at schools and talk about the story, because it's so important. That's also why we started something called Generation G. So we've taken huge leaps in what acceptance and inclusion looks like, but there are still scary things that happen today. In Gigi's own high school, she's 17 years old now. So she's like any other 17-year-old. She loves Starbucks and Snapchat and her boyfriend are the most important things in her life. And she was going to school, her older sister is 2 years older than them. So when she was a freshman, her sister was a junior. And they were in a broadcasting program, which is pretty cool. So they do media in high school, and they do public announcements that are on video. And Gigi wanted to be a part of that. She public speaks all over the country. She's at every grand opening. She sang the national anthem at the Cubs game. I spoke to 2,000 of the Cubs' best donors and ticket sellers. And she's done incredible things in her life. So she thought she'd be a good fit for this broadcasting group, right? And her sister's in it, so she could at least keep an eye out on her. Well, her sister was accidentally included in a group chat where a meme of Gigi went around with a horrible caption. If you don't know what a meme is, it's a photo where they put white writing on it. It's a joke. And this was sent to this whole group in this broadcasting, where she thought was her friends and peers. Her sister was accidentally included on it and informed the school what had happened. And the only thing they said was, we can do our best to be inclusive, but we can't punish these kids for a joke, right? So even in our own backyard, even where Gigi's is well-known, Nancy is well-known, it's still happening to our own girl. And so that's really hard. And so Generation G was something that we started after the Ice Bucket Challenge hit, and we thought we need a way through social media to try and expand just a positive message, right? That's what all of our bracelets are today. It's just a reminder to be, we say, accepting, generous, and kind are our 3 pillars. So we started Generation G to educate high schoolers to make it trendy to be kind. It shouldn't have to be that way, but that's where we're going to start. And so the whole goal was to take a picture of yourself with a heart in your hand, post it on social media, and tag 21 other people or donate $21 to the Playhouse. It has grown. We're still working on expanding it. Our goal is to get 1 million people to sign on to the pledge that we have online by the end of the year. We're a long way from it, but it's still a goal. But that's all that Generation G is. It's just a conscious decision to be a little bit better, to be a little bit more accepting, a little bit more generous, and a little bit more kind. So what can you do to help improve programs and support for individuals with all different special needs? The first thing is it starts with respect. A lot of this is not because people intend to be disrespectful, it's because they don't know. So now we're educating. It is Down syndrome, not Downs or Downs syndrome. It's not owned by anybody. So it's just Down syndrome. And the other important part, and this is for any child with any kind of special need, is people first language. So you would never say, cancer Steve, right? It's Steve is going through cancer. Same thing for adults with Down syndrome. It's not Joe is Down syndrome or Joe has Down syndrome, or not Down syndrome Joe. It's always Joe has Down syndrome, if you need to even say the syndrome. This person has autism, this person has whatever the diagnosis is. But the person always comes before any diagnosis or any talk about what their disability is. The other ways to make programs more successful for people who are, we call it differently able, is a multi-sensory approach, right? We all learn in different ways, so if you can incorporate that into their programs, then you're accommodating a lot of different needs. So we sing things, we sign things, we say things, we show things, we touch things. Anytime we can have manipulatives, we're going to put manipulatives out there. So it's way more fun to engage in a book or a story if you've got something that you can do with it. Anytime we read a story, we almost always have Velcro characters. And when they see their character come up, they go and put it on the board. And not only does it help with gross motor because it makes them have to get up and move, and that's working on that hypotonia, and it's working on their focus, so they have to listen to the part of the story where their character is engaged. They get to touch something, it's that texture of what felt feels like. It's just a really great way to engage a full service just with a story. The second supportive environment thing that you can do, and this is, we're all, I definitely am, I do this all the time. When somebody is struggling, the first thing you want to do is step in and do it for them, or help them with it. But they're not going to learn or improve their skill set if we're constantly doing things for them. Nicole's another example of that. When she was 30 years old, her mom was still brushing her hair, and the first thing we said to her is, you better stop right now. She is a grown adult. So even if she can't communicate to you that she can do the things, we know she can do those things. So you need to stop right now so she can start to become more independent in her life. It's come a long way from there. So our method of teaching independence is I do, we do, you do. So I will show you what we need to do. We're going to do them together, and then I'm going to let you do it on your own. And if you're still struggling, we can repeat those steps, and that's okay. We can repeat it 1,000 times if we need to, but eventually they will get that independent piece of it. And the other thing that we do when we're talking about doing it together is a method called hand over hand. So instead of trying to coach them through it through verbal cues or by giving them a pat on the back or any other support, if they're cutting, you put your hand over their hand when they're holding the scissors, and you cut with them. If they're turning a page and struggling to grab the page, you grab with them. So again, it's teaching them the movements and the actions that they need to take, but supporting them in it until they can become independent. The third one is picture schedules. This is really important for any child with any special need, is following a schedule, and routine is a huge part of it. So anytime that you can have a photo that shows what your schedule of even if it's a 1-hour story time activity, we're going to read one book, we're going to sing a song, we're going to read a second book, we're going to sleep, we're going to get up and stretch, and then we're going to read the third book. Just having that gives them, this is what we have to do. They're not concerned or stressed out about the fact that they don't know what's coming next. They're in a new environment, they're with new people that they may not know, so the only thing that we can do to kind of regulate and have them feel secure is that schedule. So it helps to engage in focus, they know what the plan is, it helps to transition between activities. If they hate the book that you're reading, that's okay, it's going to happen sometimes. They know, okay, after this book that I hate is happening, there's another activity after that. So I can get through this because next I'm going to enjoy what we're doing. It creates those clear expectations. But the other great thing when we're talking about literacy skills is having the visual cues with the written cues. Because then they'll start to associate those two things together. So if I see a picture of a book and the word book underneath, eventually I'll start doing that sight word recognition and realizing that book means book. So that helps with literacy skills as well. So photo schedules are a huge part of what we do, and other ways that you can engage them in programs. We also talk about progressions, not milestones. So if you have a child with special needs, what you're constantly hearing is that they're not hitting milestones. They're not hitting these milestones. They're at an 80% gap for this milestone that they need to reach at this age. There is so much comparison, not only to their typically developing peers, but also to their other peers who have Down syndrome. And so it can be very negative and hard for families to constantly hear, your child's not doing this, and your child's at an 80% lack in this, and it's devastating to hear it at every single meeting, at every single early intervention planning, at every single school meeting. And so we will never do that at Gigi's Playhouse. We do something called progressions. So if your goal is to be able to run 20 steps, and right now you can do 3 without getting out of breath, if next week we can build up to 4 steps, that's progression, right? We've made a step forward, we're going to celebrate that. Any chance we have to celebrate, like I said, we have awesome karaoke nights, but we party and celebrate whenever possible. Because they don't hear that a lot. So anytime we make any progression forward, we're going to celebrate those momentums. If you're in a library program and you can focus for 20 minutes and that's all that you have, and the next time you come to a program you're focusing for 25 minutes, you've made progression forward, right? That's okay, that's great, we're going to celebrate that. If the next time you come you sit for 2 minutes less, we're having a rough week. That happens too, and that's okay too. We're not going to celebrate when you're having a rough week, but we're not going to make you feel bad because we all have those days that we're just off. And then the next time we're going to hope that you're back on, we can get you back on track and back on those progressions. But we never want to, comparison is the thief of joy. Somebody told me that once, and I thought that was such a great quote. And so great for this, because we want to create as much positive atmosphere as we can. And best of all is our way of doing that. So here are some of the behaviors that you're going to see. There's a lot of, you guys are probably already doing some of this, but there's a lot of great places that are now creating sensory spaces for kids. But when we think of sensory spaces, most will think of sensory avoidance. And people don't actually realize that sensory seekers is also a side of sensory disorders. So, kids can do one side or the other. They can be sensory seekers, they can be sensory avoiders, and they can actually sometimes be a combination of both. Individuals with Down syndrome, because of that low muscle tone, are actually sensory seekers for the most part. They seek input because they're not receiving it in their day-to-day activity. So things like stepping, you don't realize that your body kind of understands your place in a space by stepping on the ground because you're getting input from the floor. If you have incredibly lax joints, you're not getting that same input from the floor. So you can start to feel a little bit stressed out and a little bit like fuzzy body until you start to get that strong input. So sometimes they stomp or they put things down harder than they realize because they don't know, they can't sense what that sensation feels like of putting something down gently. That muscle's so heavy, they just throw it down and that's what they can do. So they tend to be sensory seekers. There are also kiddos that have a dual diagnosis. They think anywhere between 9 to 20% of individuals with Down syndrome have dual diagnosis of either autism and Down syndrome or ADHD and Down syndrome. And that will change what their sensory behavior is like. Like I said, most of our kids tend to be sensory seekers, but when you add that second diagnosis to it, it tends to flip the switch and go to sensory avoiding. So kids with autism tend to be sensory avoiding. If sensory needs are not met, that's when you start to see behavioral things. They'll throw things, they'll storm out, they'll yell. A lot of different negative behaviors are actually not because the child's a bad kid or behaving badly, it's because their sensory needs are not being met. It's because internally they're feeling this turmoil that they can't figure out how to get out and they can't express to the world. So being able to meet their sensory needs will a lot of times improve those behavior issues. Either way, sensory play, even for kids who don't have any kind of disability, is a really great way to engage kids. Babies should feel different textures. It's part of getting to know the world and feeling all these different great things that we have in the world. And our senses are how we understand all those things. So sensory play for anybody is great. So there are a couple things that you can do for both sides of it. The first one we're going to talk about is sensory seekers. And a lot of this is touch or gross motor. So Play-Doh, sensory bins. If you don't know what Orbeez are or water beads, we have them bouncing around the Playhouse constantly. They're always flying around the Playhouse. But they're a really great textural activity that can calm kids down. One of our kiddos named Liam is in our literacy program. So our literacy program is tutoring. It's a 45-minute session. They're expected to be able to try and sit for the 45 minutes. And the first time he went with his volunteer tutor, he was on the struggle bus, right? He could not sit for 5 minutes, didn't care about the book. He was throwing things. We had some behavior issues. And the tutor came to me and she's like, any ideas? I'm like, I do actually. He also went to one of our programs called Destination Discovery where we explore a lot of different sensory activities. And he loved these water beads, these Orbeez. And I said, for his next session, why don't you start playing with something, a sensory activity? Start with a sensory activity, let's get him regulated, and then try and go into literacy, right? So we hit a bunch of letters and this bucket of Orbeez, and let him look for them. So we got to stick his hands in this bucket, find the letters, name what the letter was and what sound the letter made, and then he was excited, he was calm, he had one hand in the Orbeez bucket and sat for 45 minutes straight. So he played with them for about 5-10 minutes maybe, and just having one hand in was enough to give him that input to be able to calm down and watch, which was huge. So being able to start with a sensory activity may help just get that regulation and that inner turmoil, that inner struggle kind of calm so that they can focus for other activities. If you start to see it build up again, like if Liam had focused for 20 minutes and started to get rowdy again, then you throw something else in. We do pasta or shaving cream or rice, sand, water, Play-Doh. There's so many great textures that you can play with. Cotton balls. Things, you guys are obviously not in a space where you can have Orbeez flying around, probably. But there's a lot of dry textures too that are also great sensory input. The other thing you can do for kiddos that are sensory seekers, other than touch, is movement. So stretching, trampolines, again, probably difficult to do here, but dancing or stretching or some gross motor things to start off will also help them kind of calm their bodies so they can focus a little bit easier. Walking on a balance line has been proven to help brain activity, not only in individuals with disabilities, but everybody. So just put a piece of tape across the floor. Have them, that's how they enter the room, walking on a little balance line and then going to their spot. So things like that can help start off on the right track. And again, if you start to lose them, if we're starting to lose attention or you have some behavior issues, we call them take a brain break. Take 5 minutes, do 5 jumping jacks or wall push-ups. Push-ups on the floor can be really hard, but just lean against the wall and do a couple push-ups. And then again, we'll give them input and kind of calm them down, oddly enough. And then alternative seating is another really great way to connect to our kiddos. So sitting on the floor can sometimes be hard because we can get antsy. It's not always the most comfortable position. Exercise balls are a great way for them to sit and have to continually get input on their body to maintain your balance on it, right? So you're focusing and thinking about that while you're sitting. Bean bags are a great way because you have to engage your muscles to be able to sit on a bean bag. You can't just plop there. Stools are also good. Anything that we have to kind of put a little bit more effort into sitting than just sitting is a great way to engage them. So again, just starting with a sensory-friendly activity and thinking about these things can really benefit our kiddos. And then on the other side, you have sensory avoiders, right? So if you have a child who is a sensory avoider, walk into a room with loud music or kids running around, they're not going to want to take one step further into the room. And that's, again, we start to see that bad behavior. So you want to create an environment that's more conducive to their learning. So the balance beam is a great way to start the program because it doesn't have to be a loud activity, and it can meet both needs, right? So the sensory seekers have that input that they need walking on the balance line, and our sensory avoiders don't have to feel overwhelmed to a dancing class when they're walking in. The hardest thing is to find the balance, right? Because you may have kids with both sides of it in one program. So you can't have blasting music because you'll have kids holding their heads and shaking. And you can't have a bunch of dancing activities and have the kids who are avoiding stressed out. So you kind of have to find that balance. The other thing that you can do for kiddos who are sensory avoiders in a group program is headphones. Noise canceling headphones are great. Weighted blankets, another great way that they can kind of, they like to feel cocooned or secure, so they like to sometimes wear tight things. It's like the same idea as a thunder coat for a dog. It's feeling that secure warmth around you can be really comforting. So a weighted blanket or a weighted vest can do that. The other great thing about weighted vests is you can actually add weight. So weighted things, I will warn you, can be dangerous if you put the wrong weight on the wrong size child, right? So we have, at the Playhouse, up to 25-pound weights, weighted blankets. I'm not going to put that on a 5-year-old because that he won't be able to move or breathe or feel comfortable. But for our adults who are 150 plus, a 25-pound blanket is perfect for them. The cool thing about weighted vests is you can actually add and take away weights depending on what you need. Again, for parents who have a child with special needs, this is not going to be a shock to them. A lot of them have experienced weighted blankets and weighted vests. They also use them at school a lot. So you're not going to pull something out that they would be overwhelmed by if you already know that they have a diagnosis of a sensory processing disorder. But if that's not something that works for you, just kind of having a blanket where they can wrap it tight is comforting as well. The other thing is if you do a sensory play activity that's great for our sensory seekers, but you also want our sensory avoiders to be able to play, is instead of having to dig their hands in, give them a tool, a big scoop or a spoon, or a shovel where they can still engage in the activity but they don't have to touch it if they're not comfortable touching it. The other thing is a lot of our kiddos who are sensory avoiders don't like being touched when they're not ready or thinking or planning for it. So creating a space that's maybe not tight like this one where you guys, if you turn your chair, might bump into somebody, that would totally stress out a child who's sensory avoiding in a new environment, right? That random touch that they're not expecting can throw off the whole day. So making sure they've got some space where they can have a sense of self and some room to move where they're not going to bump into somebody helps them feel comfortable. And then same thing for our sensory avoiders or the sensory seekers, those alternative seating can be really comforting for them. So a beanbag is comforting and warm, it will kind of wrap you up. An exercise ball will help them get focused because they're thinking more about sitting on the exercise ball than about what they're planning on, their behavior issues that they're going to do, right? They're not thinking about throwing something because they have to sit and feel strong sitting. And there's also something called a cube chair, which is just like a little square that's got a little seat that almost looks like booster seats that they find at a restaurant, at the movie theater. Those chairs can be really good for our kiddos to be able to sit and feel comfortable and stable. That's a lot of information. I don't expect you guys to remember all of that. But you have a recording, and I can send a presentation to anybody who wants it. Stimming is one that I want to talk about just because it's for families that have a child who stims. It's one of the most embarrassing things that you can see your child do. So stimming behavior is a repetitive motion. You'll see it a lot of times with kids with autism, but sometimes kids with Down syndrome will do it too. It's rocking or flapping, or what are some other ones? Rubbing your hands together, or wringing your hands a lot, but they'll do it over and over and over and over and over again, almost obsessively. So stimming is actually okay. It's a way for them to kind of get that input that they're seeking if they're not getting it some other way. That's a lot of times what they're doing is just self-regulating. That's a way that they've found to get input to kind of calm themselves down. The time when stimming becomes a problem is if it's distracting from whatever the group activity is. Or a lot of times what you'll find is if you're in a group with typically developing peers and kids with special needs, is unknowingly the typically developing peers are starting to mimic what the child is doing when they're stimming. And that is what hurts parents, right? You know your child's doing something that looks weird to other people, that they don't understand, and when you see another child doing it, you know they're not intentionally mocking your child, but you also know that they're then realizing that your kid's doing something strange. And that's when the stimming behavior can become challenging. So to try and stop a child from stimming, you have to give them a distraction. You have to give them something else to focus on, something else to work on, something else, if they're wringing their hands, something else to do with their hands, so they can stop that behavior. And it can be really hard to stop because in their head, that's all they want to do. So again, stimming is not a bad thing. You don't have to stop a child from doing it unless you're seeing somebody else mimic it, or it's hurting the family, or if it's distracting from what they need to be doing at the time. So sensory story time is a great way to involve participants with different needs in the library activity. You want to create a conducive environment so everybody can feel comfortable. You want to start an activity with sensory seekers like a song or dance, but allow those sensory avoiders to not participate. It's okay if it's not your activity. You can take a step back. You don't have to be in the circle if it's not your thing, but come back to the circle for the next activity because you might enjoy that one. And then also give them a brain break if they're feeling overwhelmed. In a lot of our programs typically are about an hour long, and we start from age 0, right? So when you got a 6-month-old, you're not going to be able to sit and focus for an hour session. So if you need to take a breather, go have a snack, and then come back to our circle, that's okay. Again, our goal is just for the next time to be able to focus a little bit longer, and a little bit longer the next time, and a little bit longer after that. But taking a brain break is not a bad thing, as long as you do try to come back to the circle afterward. And sometimes trying a new activity can be hard. Like I said, not sitting or sitting and not listening for the entire time is expected for a lot of our kiddos. But we hope that if they come for a while, eventually they'll be able to participate in the entire hour's story time. The other thing that's really cool that you can create is something called a social story. If anybody knows or doesn't know what this is, it's like writing a little book of what they can expect when they go to that program. And that's something that the family can read, in a week or 2 weeks building up to where they're supposed to go. So it just says, today Anna's going to get up out of bed. We're going to get dressed, and again we do visual cues with the wording cues. We're going to get dressed. You and your sister we're going to have breakfast. Then we're going to get in the car. We're going to go to the library with a picture of the library. Here's what we're expected to do when we go to the library. We're going to participate in these activities. Here's a picture of the room that you're going to be in. All of these things can help them mentally prepare for something that's going to be different for them. And a lot of times we've seen huge improvement when they have a social story before going to a new experience. So helping a parent create those social stories is great. We use lesson picks, but there's Boardmaker is the well-known version of that. That's how we create a lot of our social stories. The other part of it is creating an experience for parents to have a good time. If anybody has had a child at a meltdown in a public place, it's hard. I have a 2-year-old daughter. We went to Target a few weeks ago, and she couldn't have a toy that she wanted, and it was like I gave her a shot in the arm or something. She was destroyed. And my child does not have any special needs. She doesn't have Down syndrome. She just was a 2-year-old acting out like a 2-year-old sometimes. And even though I know that people are probably looking but understand that I've got a 2-year-old, it's still embarrassing, right? It's not fun to be the one that everybody's staring at and have a kid that's screaming. When you add a disability on top of that, the parents are like hyper aware of other people staring at them, of other people judging them, of other people saying, oh, she's just acting out because she has Down syndrome. And that's harder than what any typical parent has to deal with. So creating a space where parents can also feel like it's okay if your child is stimming, it's okay if your child is yelling, it's okay if your child has their hands in their ears and they're rocking because it's too much for them. These are all behaviors that we expect, and that's okay. So a lot of times it's just allowing parents to feel overwhelmed, but encouraging them that nobody is judging them, that nobody is staring at them, that they're welcome to come, even if their child sits for 5 minutes and has bad behavior for the rest of the time, encouraging them to come back and say, maybe next time we'll do a little bit better, because if we're used to it, he'll already have done it once. Here's some things that we can try to make him feel more comfortable next time, because it can be really hard to keep going back to something that you know is going to be an ordeal. So the parent education and parent comfort part of it is also a huge part. At the Playhouse, the programs are not only for the participants, but they're a chance for parents to network. Sometimes they just need to take a breather and to talk to another parent about, hey, here's something that my kid is, they're spitting up all the time. Does your kid do that? How did you fix that? What did you do? What are some tools that you use? Who did you see? So kind of having that parent atmosphere and network where they can connect is really important. The other thing that is important, one of our moms actually pointed this out to me when I was talking about coming here today, is that a lot of sensory story times and other story times happen during the day, but our kiddos are in school for the most part. They start preschool typically at about 3 years old, which is earlier than some other kids may. So they want to be able to go to these activities, but the kids are in school. So being able to offer story times after school or on weekends or at alternative times may be beneficial to our families, but also beneficial to the kid. Again, I have a 2-year-old who is the happiest thing in the morning, and then you go to the afternoon and she's a 2-year-old. So sometimes our kids are just better in the morning than they are in the afternoon, or vice versa. We just have times of days that we feel a little bit better, or after a nap we're feeling good. So accommodating different schedules will also be good. A lot of sensory story times you think of littles, but some of our teens also like to read a story or want to be able to engage with other peers their age. So there is no age limit on enjoying a good book, right? And then the other challenging conversation to have, and I don't have an answer for you on this, it's just a conversation to have, is being inclusive, right? So when we have programs with typically developing peers, while that's good because we want to connect to our peers, it can again become a challenge for a parent with a child with a disability, because if they start acting up, you feel like everybody's looking at me, they all know my child has Down syndrome, they all think that she's acting like this because she has Down syndrome, but really they don't know that she's got a stomach ache or that she didn't take a nap today. So it is a balance between finding that inclusive environment, but also making sure our special needs parents feel like they've got a safe space to go where they're not being judged. So sometimes I think it's about the ratio, it's making sure that they're not the only child with a child, but they're not the only parent with a child with special needs in the room. If they're in a whole group of typically developing peers, that's fine, but we want to also just make sure that they feel comfortable. I don't have a perfect answer for you on that. I don't think we should have programs that are only for kids with special needs, or programs that are only for people that are typically developing, because how horrible would that be if they want to go to a program and they're told they can't because their child's got Down syndrome? That's even worse. I think it's just being knowledgeable and being respectful that they might be going through a struggle that nobody understands. Song and sign time. The first program that we start with all of our babies, the first program that we go through with all of our kiddos is song and sign. So we teach all of our babies baby sign language. It's really fun to learn. I recommend anybody just kind of picking up a basic ASL book or going online. They've got a lot of great websites and YouTube videos for how to learn basic sign language. But the great thing about baby song and sign time is it's good for any baby. For like the first year, babies with Down syndrome are pretty much babies, right? They eat, sleep, poop, and cry. And they go through a lot more therapies than other kids, but for the most part, they're just babies. And so teaching sign language is a great thing for any baby. We've found so many studies that show benefit to not only individuals with Down syndrome and other disabilities, but any baby that learns baby sign language tends to communicate earlier in life than they do their peers who don't learn baby sign language. It also cuts back on frustration, right? You can tell them, are you hungry? And they can respond before they know how to get those words out. So kiddos with Down syndrome won't say their first word. Most kids that are typically developing say their first word in like 1 and 2 years. Our kids can be 3, 4, 5 years old before they get that first word out. So the more they can sign, the more they can get out what their frustrations are and explain things that they need or how they're feeling, and that's a huge part of it. Some of our kids know 85 plus signs. It's so fun. And sign language is the coolest thing, because what you start to find is that signs make sense. The sign for dog is calling a dog, right? That makes a ton of sense. So when you find those fun connections, it helps to encourage regular communication as well. So this is a great kind of program that you could offer for everybody to attend. Song is another great way to start communication. We memorize things and learn things through song typically faster than we learn from saying it. So we do a whole hour program of signing, singing, a guitar plays, and a parachute. And for a baby who's 0 to 3 years old to be able to focus on that is pretty awesome. Oh, the other thing, a handout. So because of this program and other things that other research I've done, I probably know about 200 different signs. And I have not ever taken an ASL course. I'm not well versed in ASL. I just keep picking things up. But one of the things that helps is giving the parents a handout. So if you go over 5 signs in a class, they can go home with what that sign looks like. So they can go home and remember, okay, I want to teach them to do, A. And so we got a little hand that says A, and they go, I can't remember what it was, so let me find that handout where it says, here's how you teach them the letter A. Or here's how you teach them mom or dad. things that they're going to say all the time are the signs that I would start with. But the handout can be really helpful for them to refer back to. And they can create a little binder at home of all the signs that they learned here, so you can start teaching the kiddo. Make and take nights are really fun. So a lot of libraries and places will offer craft nights, but what if you gear your crafts towards kids that need sensory activities, right? So we can make slime, is a big one. The stress ball is a really fun activity where you can make a glitter bottle. If you don't know what that is, it's like glitter in a water bottle with glue, some other things, and you can flip it and the glitter takes a long time to kind of fall down. That's one of the ways that we help regulate behavior. When we have bad behavior or they're feeling overwhelmed, is that glitter bottle. Let's take a deep breath, let's focus on our glitter, and watch it fall down. It's kind of soothing for them. It's kind of soothing for me too. So that can be a fun activity that they can make here and then take home for them to use in their day-to-day lives. Play-Doh is another really fun one. So we do a lot of make and take nights where we are doing a craft, but it's geared to be able to go home and use at home as well. And look how fun it is. Opportunities for adults. Like I said, finding careers can be really challenging. So finding places for them to go so they're not sitting at home all day is huge. A lot of parents of an adult are still working, right? So when they're not home, if their child doesn't have something to do, they're going to sit at home and watch TV. That's just the truth of it. Or they're going to sit at home on the iPad or sit at home and hopefully read books, but that doesn't happen all the time. So finding ways to engage them outside of a career is also a great way for adults to have opportunities out there. The other challenge is that when you've got a disability, sometimes you get you get accommodations from the government to help pay for things that you need. But for those adults, they actually have a limitation to how much money they can make before they lose those benefits. And so they can't find a 40-hour job. So a lot of times they have to work part-time. What are they going to do the rest of their time? So having opportunities for adults to volunteer here at any library is good. There's so many things that they can do to support you guys and make your lives easier, but also just have a place to go and feel important and feel needed. And the second thing is, I think is really fun, is having adults come and read to younger participants. If you have a story time, have different readers come in and read books. A lot of our adults are phenomenal readers and can come and engage kids and read a story to kids, whether they're typically developing or they're younger participants who have Down syndrome or other disabilities, and make it really fun. They can also open up a line of communication. Most of our adults are fine with talking about the fact that they've got Down syndrome. They're incredibly proud of who they are and how far they've come and what they do. That if somebody asks a question, they're welcome to answer the question. And who better to hear it from than the person themselves? So I encourage you to invite somebody who has any kind of disability to come and read to the younger participants, because starting that conversation and making that not scary and not different is a great part of being accepting. This was another request from one of our parents, is it can be really hard to find a book that is about a child with special needs. It's hard for them to search and say, I want to read a book about a child with Down syndrome, or I want to read a book about a child with autism. So having an inclusion corner that is specifically books about kids with special needs would be really helpful for them. They want to be able to, a lot of our families who volunteer at the Playhouse and have younger kids who don't have a disability want to be able to try and explain that disability to their kid in a way that they'll learn best. And books are a great way to do that. So some that we like are something called Eli Included, 47 Strings, Opening the Octopus Rat. Those three are kids' books that can kind of teach about Down syndrome in a fun, encouraging way. The Lucky Few is a great one for adults. It's just kind of a place where they can go and find a book that associates with them. It doesn't just have to be Down syndrome, it can be any disability. And then inclusion in advertisement. When you open a magazine, what you're going to see 99% of the time is all typically developing models, or even now we're getting more inclusive in our advertisement, thank goodness. But making sure that if you send out a newsletter or a bulletin about what's going on in the library that week, or even your social media posts, having kids of all different abilities can be really welcoming. So a parent who opens that book up and just had a baby with Down syndrome and says, I want to go to a library class, and feels like every kid at the library is going to be a typically developing kid, but then opens a book and sees a child with a limb difference, or Down syndrome, or in a wheelchair, you feel like you're seen, you feel like you're being heard, you feel accepted, just by putting a photo somewhere. So again, make sure you have hold harmless or your release so that you can use that photo. It's a really great just to feel seen and accepted. This is my last slide, and then I can open up to questions, but I just love this quote, because it's so true of who we are. Nancy was one woman who had a dream to start this Playhouse and made a promise to her daughter she's going to make the world a better place, and we're now 46 locations bigger. And every single location is opened by a small team of people that just want to do the same. They just want to create a better world for their kid and other kids. So never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And then Max is just